event where we are releasing our newest report, the new CCO, Transforming in a Changing World. I'm Roger Bolton. I'm the president of the Arthur W. Page Society, and we are really pleased to be completed with 2 years of work in making this a reality. Now the real work begins of making it real in the real world. I'd like to welcome all of the members of Page and Page Up who are with us today, and our guests, and those watching on live stream for being with us for what we hope will be a very interesting presentation, but more importantly, discussion. And we hope that everyone here will participate in the discussion. We'll have plenty of time for that in a few minutes. I need to thank a few people. First of all, Gary Sheffer. Gary is the immediate past chairman of the Page Society. It was really Gary and John and I who sort of conceived of this idea a little over 2 years ago. And Gary led us through the 2 years of creating this report. And so his vision and leadership was instrumental to where we are today. I'd like to thank Amer Hines and Mike Fernandez, co-chairs of the Thought Leadership Committee. Amer in the first year and Mike in the second, and Wendy Strong, their co-chair throughout, for their work in leading this project as well. And most immediately, the two leaders who actually developed the report, John Iwata of IBM and Sean O'Neill of Heineken, who's not able to be with us today, for their leadership in putting this report together. As well as his own individual leadership on this, John engaged a number of folks from IBM. We were the beneficiaries, as always, of generosity from IBM, and the IBM team is here today. Mike Wing, who I'm pleased to say has been my co-collaborator since the beginning of this thought leadership journey a decade ago, and continues to be a lot of the intellectual property in the Page Society comes out of Mike Wing's brain. And Matt McMahon. What did you say?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, yeah. Well, we're happy, so. The rest of the IBM team, also great. Matt McMahon, Michelle Morrison, Justin Cook, and Amy Loomis, all here today as well. I need to thank our host for today, Richard Edelman, for allowing us to be here, and more importantly, for the incredible Edelman team that supports us as our pro bono agency of record. The amount of work and the amount of value that we get out of Richard and his team is just unbelievable and so much appreciated. Matt Harrington is here today. Carla Herrera, Kirsten Coatney, Catherine Deuceman, and Kim White, who's also a Page member, also here. Thank you all, Edelman team, for your support. And of course, finally, I have to thank the Page team. Elliot Mizrahi, who has just been an incredible leader and writer and conceiver of this throughout. Dan Struhall, Mary Elliott, Sue Anderson, Eric Towns, Mary Boone, Tim Roberts, just a great team of Page. We're so grateful to all of you who have contributed to this. I will introduce John in a few minutes, and John will give us a little highlight of the report, and then we'll go to Gary in the panel. Gary will introduce the panel at that time. We are live on live stream, and we are also live in the sense that we have reporters in the room, so everything here is on the record. And we hope that you all will participate in dialogue not only inside the room but also outside the room through social media. You can use the hashtag #NewCCO. That's #NEWCCO for any tweeting or other kind of social media you may wish to do. And we would encourage you to do that not only today but throughout the coming months and years as we seek to make this conversation bigger than this room and those who are watching through live stream, but really throughout the C-suite, all of our membership, and anyone who cares about the importance of business being responsible and earning trust in the world. We have a digital white paper online. I think it's live now, and it is a place where you can actually engage, and there are survey questions within the digital white paper. We have a Medium blog going up, I think, today as well. We will have a great discussion at the spring seminar in New York at the Conrad on April 7th, which Mike Fernandez will lead. We will have a similar launch to this in London on April 12th, hosted by Rob Flaherty at Ketchum. We will have another similar discussion in Milan on May 3rd, hosted by Tony Muzzi Falcone, who is here today. Where's Tony? There he is. Tony Muzzi Falcone of Methodos will host us in Milan on May 3rd. And we'll have a great conversation at the Page Exchange, which is our new mid-year meeting in San Francisco on June 23rd. And then more and more and more. So please stay tuned. The Page Society is the global membership organization for chief communications officers, PR agency CEOs, and educators. Our mission is to strengthen the enterprise leadership role of the CCO as the builder of stakeholder relationships and guardians of brand and reputation for enterprises of all sorts around the world. We work to help enterprises act responsibly and create value for customers and shareholders, and most importantly, for society at large. Since 2007, our thought leadership reports have looked at what is, examined what's coming, and imagined what might be. Then, we try to bring that vision to life by raising the bar for corporate communicators and for global business. In 2012, we introduced the Page model, which laid out what we must do to help enterprises build corporate character and stakeholder advocacy. We are here to introduce the new CCO report, which shows how the CCO of the future will lead the enterprise to success. Dave Sampson couldn't be here. Dave is our current chairman from Chevron, but we have a message for him, which I would like to play for you now.
Hello, I'm Dave Sampson from Chevron and chairman of the Arthur W. Page Society. The Page Society was founded more than 30 years ago with the belief that communications and public relations must be integral executive functions in a successful enterprise. To this end, in 2007, we issued the Authentic Enterprise. In this important piece of work, we validated that belief by describing the increasing need for enterprises to devote themselves to a genuine corporate identity and to actively and ethically engage with stakeholders to earn their trust, which is essential to operating in a volatile world. We followed the Authentic Enterprise with Building Belief in 2012. In it, we expanded this idea with a model for how chief communications officers can build engaged enterprises worthy of that trust. We articulated the need to develop corporate character, a clear sense of values and purpose that permeates the entire organization. Around that corporate character, CCOs then work to help build shared belief with stakeholders, initiating a virtuous cycle that, in turn, earns their advocacy. In our latest report, we describe how and why the CCO is more critical to enterprise success than ever before. As many of you have experienced firsthand, our roles have been transformed, especially over the last few years. Today's CCOs are leading on corporate culture, employee engagement, and delivering tangible business value. Helping to establish a social purpose for the enterprise and navigate global, economic, political, and social issues is now central to what we do. Also central to what we do today is building essential stakeholder relationships and advancing diversity and inclusion within our workplace and our profession. It's also our responsibility to protect the reputation of our respective organizations by helping to ensure that we act responsibly. As Arthur W. Page famously said, public relations is 90% what you do and 10% what you say. That notion has never been truer than it is today. The CCO is at the center of how enterprises deal with rapid and constant changes happening in our world. As we look into the future in our new CCO report, it's clear to see just how crucial our influence can be. But to achieve influence, we must be prepared to continually advance ourselves to meet that future. The new CCO is the Page Society's perspective on how we do that. The new chapter begins here.
So now I'd like to introduce John. John and I have had a long partnership. When I was chairman of Page, I asked John and Valerie DiMaria to think about how we might really start to think about the role of the CCO, and that led to the Authentic Enterprise. When Meryl McDonald was chairman, she asked me and John to lead the work that led to the Page model. And then when Gary became chairman, and I was president, we asked John to continue on and work with Sean, and this report is the result. So somehow John gets in the middle of all of it, and we're pleased to have you here today to explain it to us, John. Thank you. We could
day, everybody. Maybe on the third time we'll get it right. This has been a constant and evolving meditation on the future of our profession, embodied in the role of the Chief Communications Officer, but it's bigger than any one corporate position. It's bigger than any one organization within the corporate model. We set out to look at the future of the Chief Communications Officer. Really what we're looking at is to try to understand the future of business. It was to try to understand the future context in which all businesses and institutions operate. What stays the same, what must endure, and what must change. The hypothesis, therefore, of how we went about producing what you were releasing today needed to reflect the changes themselves. We could have tasked a group of people, we could have hired an agency, we could have hired academics to ask questions, literally, what is the future? What do you think the future of this role will be? But we conjecture that, in fact, it has been said many times, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed, that we are changing today. Perhaps we don't realize what we're changing, perhaps we don't realize why we're changing, but the budgets are moving, the skills are shifting, the measurements are changing, the outcome of our work is different, our relationships, the rhythm of our business are all changing. And if we could somehow capture that together through an inclusive process, including digital methods, we would have a pattern in mind, out of which we could put together the paper and the report that we're releasing today. So that process has taken a good amount of time here. This is, in a nutshell, some of the things that we did. We engaged more than 450 leaders of corporate organizations, CCOs, the heads of agencies, as Roger mentioned, academic leaders, and others. We did something else, which was to use social media, basically, what we call the JAM, to engage the membership of the Page Society and others over a period of time. You see here more than 200 engaged in a collaborative discussion using an online platform in this JAM. 3 continents, they generated over 38,000 words. These are communications professionals, after all. We then applied analytics to understand not just keywords and themes, but the meaning of what was being shared. So between the in-person interaction, many opportunities to do that, small and large scale, this global digital conversation, the research that we did looking at the literature, talking to other C-suite leaders, whether they were heads of marketing, finance, human resources, and CEOs themselves, interviews, and all the rest. This all fed into the work that you see today. What do we conclude from this? Well, I'll say in advance, it may sound like some things have not changed and some things are new. All of it's changing. All of it's changing. The first is the foundational CCO, as we describe this part of the model. You would recognize, for those who are familiar with our profession and the role that you occupy today, these anchors, these elements of the foundational role. We are business people. We have to understand our industries. We have to understand our companies, our competitors, our markets. We are business people who may specialize in the profession of communications. That's always been the case. It's of increasing importance. This notion of enterprise reputation, some call it brand, some call it reputation, the essential identity of our enterprises and institutions, we have to be not the guardians of that. We have to play a central role in that, and it is an ongoing debate in meditation about what that is. This notion of corporate character is not rooted in ethics and integrity alone, which by themselves are important but not differentiating. They are at its core unique identity of an enterprise. Effective communicator, you might say, well, why else do you have the role or the title? But in this world of noise and of buzz and competing messages, the real thing here is clear thinking and articulation of what we want the world to understand and act upon. Much more to be said about the foundational CCO, and it's all there in the report for you. The second aspect of the model is the CCO as integrator. Why is that? Well, in a word, it's because of the transparency that we all live in today. We know about social media, we certainly know about the internet, we know about the ability of people not just to be informed at the speed of an electron, but to share what they see, what they think, what they know. And beyond that, to organize for action. So it has never been the case that you could segment all your stakeholders, whether they were employees from the outside world, or customers in one country from customers in another country, or investors from the neighbor. That's never really been the case. Today, it's impossible. There is no such thing as a good news or bad news event in our field. Everything matters differently to the stakeholder. And the need for integration now transcends the need for coordination or even collaboration. It is a need for chief communications officers to work with the head of HR, with the head of finance, with the head of government relations, as necessary in a different way. Some people confuse this with restructuring of an organization, whether one function is becoming integrated or merged with another. It's an interesting debate. There are some instances of that here and there. But the bigger thought here is a cultural change. It's a mindset change. It's a way of working differently. You start to hear things like agile. What is that? It means the orientation of work effort in a multidisciplinary way, regardless of structure, regardless of organization, to come together. So anything a corporation announces or is trying to accomplish now affects the employee, the customer, the shareholder, the neighbor, and on and on. That is a new challenge, a heightened challenge, and quite intense today. The last one here, we would argue, is the newest and the hardest for some to fully comprehend and to get their arms around. And that is the Chief Communications Officer as builder of digital engagement systems. That's a mouthful, but every one of those words matter. This is the CCO at the center of the digital age. This is the digital CCO. You might say, well, we've been doing that for many years. We've been posting videos. We've been sending out email. What's the E stand for if not for that? That's true. It's all true. It's not just picking up new tools and channels. It's not just, well, the radio came along and the television came along and now here's the internet thing. No, this is a fundamental change in behavior, in decision making, in perception shaping. And no company is immune from so-called digital disruption, and our profession is not either. To illustrate what we mean by this, some statistics, none of these will surprise you. Half of the world now uses the internet. Almost 2.5 billion social media accounts around the world. Think about this. 9 out of 10 smartphone users have the device within arm's reach 100% of the time. Like right now. Right. Except I left mine in my briefcase. I didn't want to mess up the live stream here. Now, if you were to go back 10 or 20 years ago and say, there's going to come a day when 9 out of 10 people will have a device that they will have within arm's reach 100% of the time, on the nightstand, in the vehicle, at work, when they shop, when they're at school, 100% of the time. That would be interesting. The question, though, is what will they do with it? What are they doing with it? Well, 84% of Americans use their mobile device to follow breaking news. 62% use that device to look up information about a health condition and a health decision. 57% use their device to do online banking. 43% to look up information about a job they are seeking. 40% to look up government services or information. 30% to take a class or get educational content. Now, if this is now a reality of how people not just get information, but do work, transact, organize for action, we have to have mastery of this. And it's fundamentally different. How so? Well, lots said in the report, but let me just mention one, and you can understand this because we're all consumers in a digital world. One is not simply using the channel, like we'll send you messages or we'll post things digitally. One is the expectation of every digital interaction. Here's one that's important. You will know me as an individual. Think about our experience as consumers in an online retail environment. Is it not our expectation that every time we go back to that retailer online, they know us as a unique person. They know every prior interaction we've had, and increasingly, they're anticipating, based on data and analytics, they're anticipating our needs and wants. It is becoming a default expectation. Why would we believe that this mode of engagement is going to be limited to commerce? It's going to transcend that. It'll be in every relationship we have with employees, with neighbors, with investors, with every stakeholder, because their behavior reflects that. This has significant implications to CCOs. The systems we build are phrased that way for that reason. This is not a system like a group of people of great expertise. This is a digital system. Think about that. How else can we personalize that engagement through all these different channels at scale? For some of us, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people or even millions, multiple hundreds of millions of people. No, it must be a system, digital, informed by data, and this is, for most CCOs, this is relatively new. That in a nutshell are the three aspects of the new CCO, and in the report there are many examples and cases and calls to action. I'll leave that to others to describe. Let me now turn it over to Gary Sheffer, who's the immediate past chairman of the Page Society and the former chief communications officer of GE, and a good friend of mine. Gary?
Thanks, John. I'm sorry, I did miss some of your remarks. I got a bad shoulder. I was looking up online while you were talking what I should do about it. But thank you very much, John. It was terrific, and thank you for all the work you've done and with Sean O'Neill at Heineken in putting this report together. As John has said, and you heard from Dave Sampson, our current chairman at Page, we're at a critical inflection point for this profession, for the CCO role. And for a lot of reasons, the changing environment that you see. And I always come back to the arc of my career at GE. I joined the company back in the Jack Welch era, 1999. And when I joined, I was largely, my role was to keep Fortune magazine and New York Times and the Wall Street Journal happy. We were a monolithic communications operation. It was Jack and no one else. And you think about that through to today, and the multiple channels and the democratization of brand and reputation and multiple spokespeople. So I've sort of had the perfect seat for this change in the job of the CCO. And I'm going to talk to these folks up here about it today and the people in the room about that. But I thought there were two or three things in the report itself that I think really reflect the kinds of changes that we're talking about. Page member, a friend of mine from Norway, Reidar Gujeram from Statoil, a great company, is quoted in this report as saying, "The CCO is responsible for interpreting society and the company's role in it." Now think about how big that job is, right? Everything that a multinational global organization does, and all the people and stakeholders they touch, being that sort of external perspective and lens on everything that's going on and how that affects your role in the company's actions. I mean, that is a huge, huge responsibility. Similarly, in here, there's a great interview or sidebar with Corey DeBrow from Starbucks on some of the things that we're seeing, the overlap of marketing and PR, particularly in the area of content creation. But Corey makes a similar point to Reidar, which is the CCO is responsible for a company executing its business through the lens of its humanity, right? Now, I guarantee you, if I walked into Jack Welch's office in 1999 and told him that was my job, I wouldn't have stayed too long at GE, right? Right? Again, size of the scope and the skills that you need to accomplish that. And lastly, Jack himself, who was at our spring conference last year, Jack said during that conference, the CEO-CCO relationship is the most important in the C-suite. It's total trust, very intimate, you're in it together, right? So again, this role of integration that John talked about, and with everything coming through this position, internally and externally, that an enterprise does, and to try to affect and actuate the values that have been expressed by employees. So that's some of the things we want to talk about today. That's how I see the future role of the CCO evolving, and it has evolved. And so you might say, so what, right, about all of this? So what that this role within the C-suite has changed? And I would say, just take a look around us at some of the things that have gone on socially, economically, politically, recently in the world. And a lot of it falls back on enterprises, governments, individuals, losing sight of their own values, their own purpose, their own mission, right? And the CCO, working with people across those organizations, in some ways are responsible for those failures. And again, you say, so what? Well, these enterprises and the folks who are represented by page members are some of the most important in the world. They provide value to people and services. It's important to share owners who have stock in their pensions. It's important to people who get government services. So when we talk about the CCO as an essential role, that is the extension that you take back to the way it affects people in their lives every day, in what they have financially, their capabilities. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this, and it's why I wanted to do this report, because in that arc that I talked about in my career at GE, I saw the elevation of this role and the importance of it, not because of who I am, but because of the environment and the changes that John and Roger described. So with that, I'd also like to welcome our folks who are on our webcast today. I'm told we have dozens and dozens of folks from around the world. So as you know, one of the things we're trying to do in Page is globalize our team. So I'm really, that's a great turnout for this webcast today, and we'll be replaying this over the next few days on our new website. I'm looking for Dan, and he's saying, yes, that's the case. So with that, let me start. And I'm going to ask some questions. You guys in the room, we've got a full room here in New York. And if you have a question, please put your hand up. So we'll interject some stuff in the room. But I'm going to start with these folks, and I want to introduce them. You know John, and Mike Fernandez to my right here is a corporate vice president for corporate affairs at Cargill, one of the smartest people really in our profession. So really glad to have him. You guys know Richard, president and CEO of Edelman, and our host here today. Tina McCorkindale is one of my favorite people in our profession. She's the new president and CEO of the Institute for Public Relations, former associate professor at Appalachian State University. Tina can bring us an academic perspective on this. So John will be sitting in as well. Roger can feel free to chime in, and he'll be walking a microphone around as we look for questions. So Mike, I'm going to start with you. I want to talk about this transformation of the CCO, and let's take a step back to the report. And the report starts with a discussion of the change in the function itself. You know, the function itself is changing based on some of the changes we've seen and that John described. So communications teams are making different investments, integrating more, creating new job roles and partnerships, measuring things differently and their performance. So for you, Mike, what's been the biggest change in the function over the past decade?
Well, it's amazing. So this year marks the 20th year that I've been a chief communications officer. And inside Cargill, because we've got this large global company and we're trying to keep connected and deal with lots of external stakeholders and the like, we've become mesmerized by a quote. And the quote is that the pace of change will never be slower. And you think about that, and over the past, not just decade, but past over the 20 years, when I first got my job as a chief communications officer, it was all focused really on those foundational steps, that John went through. But progressively, it's begun to take on the other aspects. And a lot of that is due to the changing environment. The world we operate in is crazier than it was 20 years ago. It's much more contentious. It's also always on, given the internet and given the way people interact. I mean, I have to worry about, if something happens to Cargill in Minneapolis, that somehow, some way, I need, while I'm deep in my slumber, somebody to manage that issue in Malaysia. So the challenges are really such that, I think the report outlines it very well. There are kind of three capabilities that we've had to morph on to this thing that we call the Chief Communications Officer. And one of them is playing that role of integrator, but an integrator, and I appreciated John's thought pattern around that it's not just an organizational discussion, because it's not. Now, he and I both have kind of the marketing and brand elements that report into our jobs, but even if that didn't, the necessity to collaborate with that function and all major functions in the enterprise is excruciatingly vital in today's environment. And then add on to that the need to fully engage key stakeholders. And we've even taken a step further in that a number of us actually actively have discussions with our critics. It's not just about, gee, let's go do something with this group. They look like a nice group to go do something with, which was probably the mode 20, 30 years ago. And now it's like, okay, so how do we get engaged in a broader conversation that people expect of us to be engaged in? So if you're a food company like Cargill, all of a sudden they expect you to be a discussant in the whole issue around global food security. They expect you to be engaged on environmental sustainability around your supply chain. And then you go to kind of that technology aspect. You know, how not only what can we do from a data analytics standpoint, which is increasingly important as well, but actually, how do we manage our teams? You know, so if you have hundreds of people that are scattered across 70, 100 countries, somehow, some way, you've got to think about how do you get out of the world of just having multiple share files that nobody knows where to go to.
Right.
But actually have a seamless way in which you communicate with all
The
audiences.
CCO has to lead a team that really follows the sun, right? If
Exactly.
you're in a global organization.
That's right.
And
It's
have
like
that.
Charles V quote.
Yeah, exactly, right, exactly.
But for many of us, you know, it wasn't true for Charles, by the way. The sun did set on his empire. But the sun never sets on many of our companies.
Right, right. Great, thanks, Mike. So Richard, I want to jump over to you, and I think this the report as the first role that we see is this foundational sort of aspect of the CCO job as a reputation steward, as a leader and counselor, as an effective communicator, which you seem to take for granted. Aren't those things that we've always done? You've got a broad view on a lot of CCOs and a lot of organizations. What are you seeing in how that's changing that role?
So the CCO actually has, in the best companies, always had that job. But in many, not. And the clear line between CMO and CCO job was extant, really probably until 6 or 8 years ago. And then there were some who started to break it, like you. And Beth. And Beth. And that was good, and that's what it should do. But it was, we do corporate and you do marketing. And leave us alone and we'll leave you alone. Well, the world's not quite so clean and simple. And in fact, it's a necessity together. But the Venn diagram doesn't stop there. It also is with HR and it's with legal. Now, legal, I think it's always been like this and continues. But HR, recruiting, keeping, et cetera. I know your campaign at GE before you left, I mean, totally oriented to getting best and brightest.
Exactly.
And yet, HR has been kind of like this with us. And so I think the critical question that is addressed in the paper is the notion of the Venn diagram and the integrator. And that you've got to have this bigger concept and purpose that somehow attracts instead of insists.
Right.
Because you don't seem to have the clout to do it. You have it, but you're unusual. Yeah, but sometimes you don't. So it's the notion of appeal to, it's what do you call it, informal power as opposed to, you know, the bludgeon.
An org chart, yeah.
Yeah, but, yeah, the org chart, right, I
Yeah.
remember that. But the real idea is to have such a powerful relationship with the CEO and also a notion that you want to pursue, a vision that people
Exactly.
can buy into.
Right.
And then attract the others to
Right.
you.
You know, this is a really important point is I was in with a company over the past few days, visiting with them. They're being acquired. And so I went down to talk to them. They asked me to come down and talk to them about this. And, we started as a discussion around what's our narrative? Who are we after this acquisition? And it morphed completely into a discussion around culture. Who are we, right? What is really special about this place? What do we value? And so it was a complete discussion, Richard, that would have been in the past done by the HR folks alone, at least in my corporate experience. They would have told me to talk to the hand. We're done, Gary. Here, write me something pithy, right, that I can. And now I find, at least in my experience, that's a partnership. And maybe one of the most important partnerships that you can have in the C-suite is that self-definition of who you are and then taking that with you everywhere you go, right? So that's a big change,
But if it's a values-driven company, if the CCO in a certain way drives the values,
right,
then you have people buy into it.
buy into that, exactly.
It's like a political campaign, which you've done.
Right, yes, yes. And never going back to, apparently. Tina, so let's talk more about this integration. So, and I want you to tell us, for this report, you did some research for us and review at some of these relationships in the C-suite. So tell us about that and what you found and what it means for CCOs.
Sure. So Terry Flynn of McMaster University and we did research looking at what is the role and how the C-suite has evolved and sort of where it is today. And what we found is that the C-suite has changed dramatically. The number of direct reports CEO has doubled. And there's all sorts of different new functions like chief change officer and chief diversity officer. We have a lot more chief of something that you have this sort of integrator aspect with. What we also found is that there's still a lot of silos as well among the different groups and departments, but it's changing as things are flattening and there's more horizontal structures. And part of that has to do with the digital transformation, which is why the two roles blend so nicely, because it's everyone's issue with digital transformation. I mean, it touches all sorts of different aspects of the organization, whether it's legal, whether it's marketing, whether it's your employees. It touches everything. So it's important that the CCO be an integrator and not just a collaborator, as John pointed out in his part, but really an integrator. I like to think of the CCO role as almost an octopus, where it's, and I think in the paper it talked about an antenna, but really an octopus with all its tentacles, there's like different tentacles that are fluid and in motion, and that's really what the CCO has to do.
Excellent. Yeah, I've squirted ink on a lot of people.
I've heard that about you.
So when they're editing my press release, that's
Someone's
really
gonna tweet
great.
that, I want you to
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
so,
Yeah.
so.
Great. So one of the things we asked as part of developing this report that I thought was a really, and I think John and the team came up with this question, is, and I'll ask Mike this, and then I'll go out to the audience. So start thinking of questions in the audience. Was if you could, as a CCO, if you could add one job to your teams, one job role that you don't have today. And again, the great thing, about this report is we talked to hundreds of people. Thanks, it really is a sort of crowdsourced from the Page Society, Page Up, et cetera. I'm really proud of that. It really reflects a lot of point of view globally as well, too. But if you could add one job role that you don't have or didn't have at the time to your team at Cargill, what would it be today?
Well, it's interesting. It's like the arc of the study again. It
Yeah.
follows what we've kind of done. I mean, first, when I came in, they were all over the place in terms of engagements. So I actually hired somebody to be in charge of stakeholder engagement and issues management.
Right, yeah.
Then we went from that to creating what we called a global news desk.
You're right.
Because we were trying to manage everything kind of top-down, hierarchical
Right.
structures, but the world, as John and others knows, is more network nodes,
Right.
and how do you get information from one part of the globe to another and sort of eliminate kind of all the structure that's
Right.
normally in place. And so we set that in place about 2 years ago. So now we're to the point where that next hire is going to be a technologist. Now, it's not going to be, we already have people doing social media, we already have data coming together, but it's going to be from the standpoint of, okay, so we've got certain processes in place, but undergirding those processes is a lot of old software, a lot of old ways of doing things, and now we need to make sense of that
Yes.
so that it's more fluid, more real time, so that we can make smart decisions about who we're influencing and why.
Yeah, that is really smart, really smart. I have to say, in my final year, last year at GE, the person in the C-suite I interacted the most with, I needed the most, was the CIO, the Chief Information Officer. As we rebuilt some of our channels internally, the platforms that we had. And again, when I started, or even recently, that was, I didn't get my computer. Can somebody come up and fix it? That was the relationship.
Yeah.
And now the relationship is so important. And so I love that. John, do you want to, if you got to add somebody to your team today, what would you add, a job role?
Yeah, good question. I'm tempted to say data scientist.
Yeah.
But we have them. So I
Yeah.
think if it was a new one, it would probably be a behavioral economist,
Okay,
behavioral science.
behavioral science.
Yeah, it's pretty logical if you think about if we're headed toward a world of personalizing engagement at scale, not mass, right?
Right.
But and that it's not just sending you a message personalized, but it's engaging you to do something.
Right.
Then I got to really be I have to have mastery of what causes people to do something.
Exactly.
In other words, their behavior.
Right.
And we like to think we're rational and logical, and we respond to information and facts. A half a cup of that's good.
Right.
But there's a lot of other things that we don't have to invent. We just have to import from adjacent fields and add it to our work, and it'll become very powerful.
Exactly. Harold Burson always says, a big important part of our job is to be persuasive. Well, how do you be persuasive if you don't know how people make decisions and what persuades them? So that's a great point. So anyone in the audience here with a question? Tony.
Yes, I would like to ask.
Tony, why don't you wait for the microphone? Roger's going to.
Yes, I'm Tony Muzzi Falcone. I would like to ask Tina, she mentioned the fact that the C-suite had doubled in doing this research that you did. Could you be a bit more specific? I mean, what does that mean? What was it before and what is it now?
Yeah, so I don't have offhand the numbers before and now, but I can tell you just the number of individuals that we have chief senior officers
So
for.
it's the next highest that we were talking about.
Yes, so the challenge with that also is that when you have so many more direct reports and people doing stuff, you have to have this integration because it's much harder to implement, like functionally implement your strategies and be integrated. So that's why, the CCO would be really valuable to ensure that we have that sort of integration.
Gary, over here.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, everybody. Steve Dinistrian from Omnicom. Thank you for the work of the report. Much appreciated. I'm curious about the findings themselves. And I saw the audiences and the constituencies interviewed. And it looks like a lot of our own, of course, a lot from the communications field, and some in the C-suite. The CEO voice, how is that weighted in the study? Are we hearing loud and clear their perspectives versus the perspectives of our own? Because I'm very curious to see what they think about the future of the role and want to hear that loud and clear.
Yeah, I forget the number, but we did interview CEOs directly. It would be in the single digits. But I think in addition to that, we found very helpful as we interviewed and engaged I think 5 of the leading executive recruiters in our space. So if you think about the executive recruiters, they are interfacing, they're hired by CEOs to find their next CCO. So in a way, that was a very efficient way to tap into these 5 individuals who are engaged with dozens and dozens of CEOs today to say, now what are you looking for? And you can imagine what we heard. Well, there are the fundamental things, but then there are the gaps, and the gaps tended to point to the new, and that was very helpful. So that was imported into the work.
The most recent comprehensive CEO study we did was just before we started the work on this report, and we found at that time that CEOs were increasingly viewing the CCO as a strategic advisor and CEOs were really understanding the environment in which they were operating with in stakeholders, and that was enhancing the role. We thought about updating that study during the course of this work and decided to wait, do our report, and then expose it to CEOs, Steve, and see how they react to it. So we're going to update that work soon. Gary, I've got another question right
Sure,
here.
from
Can we
Emer,
go to
yep.
Emer?
So I think this question is probably best targeted at you, Richard, because I think we're privileged here to have representation from the communications function from some of the most progressive brands in the world. But this is a journey, and you talk about the future is now, but I think within Page and certainly clients we consult, the journey has been historically, when I started out, it was media by the pound. That's what the CEO cared about. Either get me on the front of the Wall Street Journal or keep me off. Then I think the digital communications function evolved and became the purview of the CEO simply because the board cared. They cared about cybersecurity or they cared about technology in some way bringing their business down. But I still feel that for many companies, we're still not at the point where digital and online influence has the ear of the CEO to anything like the extent that we might want it to. And I was wondering from your perspective, what do you think is preventing that? Because I think it's intuitive for those of us who understand influence, but for some reason, it's not getting in, and I think that's the flip side of the question, which is, what is preventing the CEO of really, and the C-suite, of really taking this far more seriously than they are?
Well, I think in the beginning period after the Great Recession, the safe play was to keep your head down. Whether you got government money, you didn't want it, but you had to take it. So then the second phase, Emer, was activist investors. And you had to keep your head down and just make money and do that. Well, all of a sudden we're now in a period where businesses kept its head down for 7 or 8 years. And a statistic that will shock you, but maybe not, is in our trust study, of mass population, 55% of Americans cannot name a single CEO. And if they can name a CEO, it's all from the tech sector. It's Zuckerberg, Jobs who's dead, Gates who's been retired for 10 years. That's it. That's all they can tell. That period. And Trump. Sickening, but true. No. But the point is, we have issues. We have important things to achieve, whether it's trade or immigration or privacy security debates. Business is absent. And CEOs have been absent, and they've been absent by choice. And I think that time's over. Time to put your head over the bunker, and more importantly, do it on things when it's not in crisis. You know, it's fine with Cook saying what he says about his stuff with the government, but, you know, and he's got a record of doing this now because of Indiana last summer and whatnot, and Schultz is different, and Paul Pullman is different, and Jeff Immelt is different, but most are not different. And we got to push them. Right
I was
now.
going to say, I completely agree with this, Hamer. And I worked in a big industrial company, right, where some of our sub-businesses were $40 billion businesses on their own. And these folks come out of engineering backgrounds or finance, have gone to business school, and this part, they've never been taught this role of influence, communications, and so it's incumbent on us. I mean, I spent a lot of my time at GE sort of running a little community college inside the organization, pointing out to them why communications is important to them individually as a leader, but why it's also important to the enterprise, and how the role of CCO can integrate that sort of set of values and take that beyond the firewall. Best example at GE was 2011, bad tax stories, Fukushima, Jeff leading the Jobs Council for President Obama. Bad favorability for us in this country. Half of the people in the country said, I don't like GE. And Immelt was smart enough and knew enough about it and had the influence that Richard talks about within his own organization to say, we're going to open the door to the country and show them who we actually are. We're not going to be measured by these things. I don't think there are enough CEOs and business leaders like that, and I think CCOs and their teams have to dedicate themselves now to helping business leaders understand what this is all about, because they're not getting it in business school. We're trying to change that through Page, as you know. It's not intuitive to them.
But to associate the CEOs also with issues that matter. So Starbucks leading on teen unemployment, or GE leading on the manufacturing renaissance, or employing veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. And like this. This is close to your business, makes sense, defensible. When you start getting into commenting on race and things, you're out on the ledge.
Yeah.
Careful on your choice.
And it also may be a whole new generation of CEOs, right?
Correct.
I think
it's
there's a lot more
generational.
prospect with the 45 to 50-year-old CEO right
Yeah.
now. Right.
We have, right here, Jeff, and then we'll go over to Matt.
You know this guy.
Yeah?
Monsieur Desmarais.
Yeah, I work for too many people on this panel already. Just to jump in on a follow-up on the comments, I guess, the old cliche that, today's news wraps tomorrow's fish, and that's not being applied to the digital space at the CEO level, I don't think, and I think that's a big paradigm shift for the CCOs to have to take on, in that, the other cliche is digital lives forever. Well, it does in a story if you're trying to mitigate a challenge, and it's incumbent on CCOs and their teams to really think about how to change both the response strategy and the engagement strategy in the digital space, because rumors last forever. They become memes. They become urban legend. I successfully actually had Snopes change an answer once. That took 6 months. And that was because the body of work online told them that what they thought was the story was the story. And facts are hard to break through. So the role of the CCO in pulling through the digital language up to the C-suite, it's got to matter. It's got to become as important. We used to joke that Monkey Boy 22 maybe didn't have the financial reach of the Wall Street Journal, but they have followers in their ecosystems, and ecosystems are more trusted than companies and media.
Absolutely. Great. I think Matt had a question.
Following a little bit, Gary, on your point about educating folks about the power and the role of the CCO. Curious about the degree to which the board is beginning to play a role as agitator and educator of the CEO. I've had more conversations with lead directors in the last couple of years as it relates to risk management and mitigation around reputation. And they're agitating their CEO to take the role more seriously.
Right.
Is that a common experience or an emerging one?
I'll speak, Mike can answer this as well, too. Boards are much more, our board was much more involved in not risk management, as you might imagine, after some recent events and things over the years, the big events and cybersecurity particularly. The board was very active at GE on cybersecurity, and that flowed down to the CEO and the CCO, et cetera. And Jeff Immelt, by the way, the CEO of the company, took from that interaction with the board, he himself led our cybersecurity team, right? That was that important to him. And every time somebody would come in with a new threat, he'd dish it off to me, of course. But I think it's also generational. I think Amer's point about the generational changes is important. It's generational in the board, too, as well. And I found, particularly among younger board members, they are interested in the risk work, but also in the opportunity. They're beginning to understand and they're smart people, they have their own business, the opportunity that the digital world presents to make the kind of connections that John talked about. But I think it's a change that's being made as members retire and new ones come in. That's my experience.
Yeah, and I would echo that in the sense that I think that the C-suite and CEOs historically have oriented towards the function based on risk and playing defense. And it's smarter ones that are now getting to the point that say, hey, we could have an opportunity here. And what's fascinating to me, too, is so the first few companies that I worked for, you were brought in to make maybe a specific presentation, but 2 of the last 3 companies that I worked for have had committees whose charter was to look at how the company's reputation is being managed. One was called a Corporate Affairs Committee, another was Law and Public Affairs Committee. And again, a lot of the discussions were still evolving around the risk portfolio, but they were beginning to edge into this notion that Are we doing a great job of telling our story? Are we positioning with key stakeholders? So I think this is something, a space to watch, because I think it is changing.
Before we take another, thanks, Mike, question from the audience, I do want to ask one question. It's been touched upon a little, but I think it's important. This one's for Richard. Is this? We've got two people here on the panel that have both CMO and sort of CCO titles. Richard, I mean, that's sort of the question that's on everybody's mind as tools and storytelling and creation have evolved, is what do you see, what are you seeing as the change in organizations, and how are they treating that one space that seems to have some significant overlap between those two C-suite members?
So in the consumer-facing companies, I see a still quite strong yellow line.
Mm-hmm.
CPG. However, the person leading the function is now expanding remit into supply chain. So both at Mars and at Unilever, the head comms person now runs sustainability.
Wow.
And that's powerful.
Yes.
And so, not into marketing, but the other direction, interestingly, arguably into operations. Whereas in tech, I start to see this, oh, we have privacy security issues. We now really have to be quite serious about this. Oh, the relative status of the CCO. In health, I don't see it. Yes, guard the reputation, but there's the bright line.
Yes.
So it depends by category.
Yeah.
And interestingly, you know, you sort of set it up in tech, but there wasn't a lot of following until the last 2 years, I would say.
I think the report does a really nice job of pointing out the differences. And I feel like in my organization, there's a thing in the report about our acquisition of Alstom, the big French energy company, and a campaign we had to run in France to convince them that an American company was the right one to buy them. The combination of marketing together, paid, owned, and earned with communications to run a campaign that included multiple stakeholders across multiple channels was incredible. I mean, just the ability to put that together. At the same time, there's many things that I do and that a CMO does that are on outside that Venn diagram, that common space. And I think what's important is the ability to mobilize, to integrate, to be nimble, to align, as John talked about, among the functions. But as I said, I spent as much time in the CIO's office as I did in the CMO's office over the past few years. So,
But Gary, with to me, clear evidence of demise of advertising,
yes,
it's become a more clear need
yes,
shortly.
yes,
Ad blocking, click fraud, you know,
Completely.
Cable cord cutting.
yeah,
So
really interesting. Yes,
And I think that's what was said in the Page Jam results as well, that even though it was qualitative, that 30% more, there's more collaboration with the CIO.
Yes.
And the research said that, and so part of what our roles have evolved, but also the roles of the other C-suite has evolved as well. So the CIO is no longer, what you said, doing this, but really thinking about the digital transformation and how to move
And
it
also,
forward.
one other thing, Gary, and the other hire I would make if I were you is somebody who's really good in paid. We can't, I mean, you
In
have
paid
both.
space, Richard?
Paid.
Yeah.
You want to be involved in much of that which is social, you damn well better have
Understand
paid,
it, yeah.
Because this is
Yeah,
not an earned
that's a great
world.
point, yeah, great point. Ken?
Yeah, I think this is a great program, and it's impressive, the research that's been done to get us to this point. But I just wondered, do we have in our planning some research a couple years down the road after we've allowed this educational effort to take place to kind of check in to see how we're going, where there are problems, and so on and so forth? Because it seems to me that that is critical if we're going to ultimately achieve what is
That's a great point.
absolutely necessary.
So you're talking to the former chairman, so I'm going to punt here. I think Roger's probably the best one to answer that question.
We're never through. I mean, I think we continue our inquiry, and that's been our pattern, but I'd like to actually punt to the co-chair of the Thought Leadership Committee.
Where
are we going next?
But absolutely, as we've been working on the report and thinking ahead, I mean, we will have lots of junctures first to pull out more information around how this is actually operating and working in various companies and organizations. And that's job one. And then job two will be at some point to circle back and see how is all of this really working.
And
It might also be a program for the Institute of Public Relations.
Nice.
Okay.
I'll get with Mike.
Come on, Ken.
Come
on, Ken.
And in truth, Roger has been a big advocate for having us have conversations more aggressively with other C-suite officers. And I think that that's part of the change that needs to take place too, around how we scope this and what does the future really look like for all of us.
You know, and one thing we haven't touched on today, Ken, is there is a whole work stream going on in Page on the skills and capabilities
That's right.
of the CCO, and what are we going to need to, what skills and capabilities are we going to need in this future that we see? Because it's certainly different in many ways, and John touched on some of them than today. If anyone, the skills and capabilities you need today are different than they were 5 years ago, so you'd be foolish to presume it's not going to be different 5 years from now. So there is a work stream as well that looks forward on what we need to know and what we need to do well over the next few years.
Thank you. I'll pick up on that theme because I'm reminded of the cover of Harvard Business Review that had a great story that talked about the most burnt out employees are the ones who are collaborating. And I think there's a real danger as we look at this work expanding and expanding and expanding on the burnout in our roles and the distraction and danger of lack of focus. One of my favorite lines from Davos was someone saying, we're drowning in data and starving for insights.
Right.
So as much as things have changed, I still think and appreciate a foundational component here is that ability to pull out the insights and make them actionable. But I do really worry about the expanding remit and focus and what that means for our teams and for the next generation of leaders that we're building.
Does anybody want to respond to that, John?
Yeah, so one, you need Watson for the.
I was going to give the same answer.
Yeah, I mean, all kidding aside, the necessity for technology to help is there. It's not going to just come from any one company, but it's coming. And what some would loosely call AI is coming. And in the same way social arrived and we didn't know what to do with that, and now it's an assumption. Shortly, whether you call it cognitive or AI or machine learning, it will just be what we use. Not man versus machine, but man and machine. But as to the collaboration, it's just so much energy. This is what I meant before about agile. I've learned a lot, about agile. It's come from the software development world, but it's coming into business. When I first heard it, I thought it was an adjective like fast and speedy. It turns out to be a method. And if collaboration means sitting in a conference room with 15 other members of the corporation, talking and talking and talking and having to-dos and coming back together, it's exhausting. Agile says, no, it's a prescribed method. Every role is different, multidisciplinary. They get trained in terminology, which is new, scrums and hills and sprints and things like that. But if you don't think about that as a technological team, but as any business unit made up of an HR person and a legal person and a communications person, and they're aimed at something, and they say, we all have a role, let's determine what we're going to do, go, come back, go, come back. They may be sitting in a conference room, but they're working in an entirely different way. We're doing that, and it's addressing this exhaustion thing because it's just a different way of working.
Catherine, the reason I laughed when you asked your question is I thought about the surveys, and I don't know where they come from every year, the most stressful jobs. And PR is always near the top of that. And I would say it's a concern. And as you heard some of those quotes on this, I have to understand the entire world and bring that perspective into this enterprise. That's a big job. So I would say two things in response to that is this sense of trust inside the organization where you don't have to fight legal on everything, that people understand the role that we play, the value that we add, and the value that we deliver to the entire enterprise. And that takes time, you know, and even in my career at GE, I was there, 13 years in the CCO job. I made, differing amounts of progress across those folks. Secondly is talent, in the search for talent. I have to have confidence that my person in Russia is good because we're the biggest multinational in Russia, right? So I think the profession itself and the CCO has to become just fanatical about talent and ensuring that you have the best teams and teams that are aligned with this sort of view of who we are and what we do, and have the courage within their own organizations to push aside the low value and focus on the high value things that we're talking about here today. It's really hard, and as the CCO, you have to give the junior members of your team the courage and the room and the opportunity to make sure their work is moving up in the value stream. So that's the thing I say, build trust within the organization, will reduce stress, you're not always in a fist fight with the lawyer, and make sure the team is the best you can possibly find. And that's just relentless recruiting and development.
Can I jump on the data
Yep.
comment? Because you said insights are really hard. And I think that's a challenge of the CCO as well, and it goes to the digital transformation, but really the data is more than that, because we really are drowning in data, and both the structured and unstructured data. And John made a comment about the technology, but really having a data scientist or behavioral scientist is so critical, because it can help you with behavior and learning why people do or think what they do, because what we assume isn't necessarily what happens. And then programs like Watson that can take the unstructured data, read it, understand it, the linguistics, and then translate that into making predictive hypotheses to then give suggestions and real insights. That's where we're heading, really using the artificial intelligence and the programs to help us do our jobs better and easier.
Great. Roger, JP?
I wonder if in the next iteration of your report, you might not also advise your members that there's a great danger of over-communicating. We're beginning to find that some companies are over-communicating, particularly in the world of mobility and other social media, to the point where their customers and members of their supply chain are beginning to tune things out. And this is a great danger. So I imagine you might want to modify the third leg of your stool to selectively digitally engage, because there's nothing worse than getting over-communicated and just tuning everything out.
Yeah. Well, it comes back to it's quality, not quantity, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
strategic.
And I think, JP, it's not only externally, it's internally as well. I was lucky enough, I spoke at our Leadership Institute every month to middle managers, 100 from around the world. And this was the first point that always came up, because they get it from the CEO, they get it from their functional leader, they get it from the vice chairman, they get it from their business leader, they get it, et cetera, down the line. And it becomes noise. And so this idea of over-communicating is really important to the people you work with.
Gary, when we think about the power of building digital engagement systems and big data and data analytics, and John and I have talked in the past about how cool it is, but it's also creepy in some respects, in the sense of really getting to understand people and know people in ways they aren't fully aware of. And then earlier, John mentioned behavioral science, so that we can understand how they make decisions. Do we have any concerns as we know more about people and know more about how to motivate them or persuade them to take certain kinds of actions, that there's an ethical component here, and that we need to be concerned about how we ethically build stakeholder engagement and advocacy?
Clearly you don't want big data to become big brother, right? And as you think about it, I think you do need to put limits and parameters. You need to have systems that allow people to say whether or not they want to participate or not. And so I do think that there is an ethical responsibility on institutions to play this fairly.
I think also developing content for content's sake without thinking about the person at the very end is also what we do, and thinking about engaging ethically. So always, and you see this even in code of ethics or the code of social media conduct, that very rarely do they say what you shouldn't do and how you should talk to people, and here's what we want you to do, and be honest and open. But very few of them say, there's a person at the other end that you're engaging with, and treating them like a actual person, and consider their time and what they're looking for in information as well.
Some of this is regulated, but I think even in cases where we wonder why people give away or volunteer private information about what they're doing and their location and on. Why would you do that? Well, I think it comes down to a couple of things. One is the trade-offs between, in the one case, security and privacy. You know, the TSA line. The other is the trade-off or value exchange between privacy and convenience.
Right.
And there, I think it's not a matter of regulation, but it's value and trust. So as long as I'm getting value when I walk down the street and I get an offer just as I walk past that store, if I perceive value, I'm not turning off geolocation. As long as that tells me a real-time traffic alert so I can save 10 minutes, there's value. If they start to compromise trust because how they use that, or I'm not getting value, I don't care what the law says. I'm not going to permit that with that enterprise or government. Just to comment on this issue, but also the comment about too much information. What is spam is like what is a weed. It's a plant just in the wrong place. Spam is an offer or a message at the wrong time. So if you just bought a car and you get an offer to buy a car, it's spam. But if you're about to have a lease expire and an offer comes in at the right time, it feels like a service to you. This gets back to personalization, which is a function of data. So it isn't so much that we're getting too much, it's we're getting too much of the wrong type at the wrong time. All of this is not solved through technology, but that gets back to trust and value.
I also think that as media companies are coming directly to companies, the obligation of the CCO is in channel planning to say, okay, I'm going to have some earned, I'm going to have some that's native advertising, I'm going to have some that's paid, and if you're going to do as GE has, be your own media company, the quality of what you do is end product. It's objective. GE Reports is not touting as much as it's this side, that
Not
side.
selling, yeah.
And that's a different approach.
And you need different teams, different job roles for all, to achieve all of that.
But I fundamentally believe every one of the companies in this room is going to have to be a media company.
I agree. Okay, well, I think we're about out of time. I want to thank our panelists for participating, and those here in the room, and the folks watching on the webcast. As we say in the report, this is a beginning. You know, this is a postulation by Page on what the future of the CCO is. It's a perspective. And of course, this will continue to evolve, and Page is, of course, dedicated to the CCO and the role of the CCO and increasing the enterprise value. I'm really proud of this work. I think it really, really reflects a grassroots, sort of crowdsourced perspective, but there's more to be done. The report at the end includes a call to action on things that CCOs themselves and their teams can begin doing based on this perspective. And of course, as Roger and John said, we're going to continue to really, and Mike, examine this in the future. So again, thanks to everyone for participating, and take care.